About 200 million years ago, Earth's rivers became the most dangerous places on the planet. In every era, across every continent, water drew life to its edge, and that's exactly where death waited. Ambush crocodiles the size of buses, armored fish with guillotine jaws, snakes thick as tree trunks coiled beneath fallen branches, and amphibians that looked like logs until they opened their mouths. Even after the age of dinosaurs, rivers stayed deadly. In the Ice Age, thirsty mammoths collapsed in flooded crossings. Giant lizards and early crocodilians hunted the shallows. And for the first humans who followed the herds to water, a single misstep could mean being pulled under and never surfacing again. This wasn't just nature. It was a trap built by evolution. A place where water meant survival, but touching it meant risking everything. This is the story of the rivers that fed the world and the monsters that made them lethal. And no river monster earned that title more than Deinosuchus. Living during the late Cretaceous, between 82 and 73 million years ago, Deinosuchus belonged to the same broad lineage as modern alligators, yet it dwarfed them in nearly every way. Fossils recovered from Texas, Montana, and New Jersey show this animal reached lengths of 10 to 12 meters, with skulls over 1.5 meters long and bite forces estimated at over 20,000 newtons, strong enough to crush bone, shell, or armored plating. Its name means terrible crocodile, and it earned that reputation by preying not just on fish or turtles, but on dinosaurs. Fossilized hadrosaur bones bearing large conical puncture wounds matching Deinosuchus teeth have been found in multiple riverbed deposits, offering direct evidence that this reptile hunted large terrestrial animals that came to drink. Unlike today's crocodiles, which ambush in relative silence, Deinosuchus was likely capable of dragging even multi-ton prey into the water, using sheer force and its own weight. Its vertebrae were reinforced for stability, and its tail, nearly half the body's total length, delivered explosive thrust during a strike. Paleo environments reconstructed from the Judith River Formation and Eagle Ford Group suggest Deinosuchus thrived in coastal floodplains, estuaries, and tidal rivers, ecosystems rich in life and predictable in their patterns. Herds would come to drink, migrating dinosaurs would cross, and in the shallows, the river waited. Deinosuchus was not alone. It belonged to a broader evolutionary pattern seen throughout prehistory. Crocodiliforms adapting to larger prey, more aggressive tactics, and wider territory. In Gondwana, similar niches were filled by Sarcosuchus imperator, the so-called supercroc of the early Cretaceous, found in present-day Niger. Estimated at over 11 meters long, Sarcosuchus had more teeth, but less crushing force, suggesting a slightly different strategy, perhaps focused on fish and opportunistic kills. But the outcome was the same. Rivers and deltas weren't passive landscapes. They were choke points, places where visibility dropped, footing failed, and reflexes meant survival. For any creature, herbivore, predator, or human ancestor, approaching the river's edge meant stepping into a kill zone measured not in meters, but in milliseconds. But some river predators didn't wait in silence. They didn't drag prey under. They simply opened their jaws, and everything in front of them disappeared. Roughly 360 million years ago, during the late Devonian period, one such predator patrolled the subtropical estuaries of what is now North America and Europe. Its name was Dunkleosteus terrelli, and it was among the most heavily armored fish ever discovered. Reaching lengths of up to 6 to 8 meters, it belonged to a class of prehistoric fish known as placoderms, jawed vertebrates encased in thick bony plating that functioned as natural armor. But it wasn't the armor that made Dunkleosteus infamous. It was the bite. Rather than teeth, Dunkleosteus had two sharpened bony plates that formed a shearing mechanism, capable of slicing through flesh and bone with frightening speed. Biomechanical models suggest it could open its jaws in less than a 50th of a second, generating enough suction to pull prey inward before the bite even landed. Once it did, the force has been estimated at over 6,000 newtons at the tips, enough to cleave through almost anything in its path, including other armored fish. Its fossils have been found primarily in marine shale formations, such as those of the Cleveland Shale in Ohio, indicating it inhabited estuarine and nearshore environments where nutrient-rich waters attracted schools of smaller prey. To many organisms, these shallow coastal zones were feeding grounds. To Dunkleosteus, they were corridors of opportunity. Though it lived long before the age of reptiles, its role in the ecosystem mirrors that of later apex predators. It was fast, it was armored, it was brutally efficient, and like modern sharks, it likely fed on anything it could catch, including others of its own kind. In fact, bite marks on Dunkleosteus skulls suggest intraspecies combat, likely over territory or dominance. While no human ancestors were alive to witness this predator firsthand, its evolutionary legacy looms large. It represents one of the earliest examples of high-speed bite mechanics, proof that long before mammals, birds, or even true reptiles existed, nature had already engineered the perfect kill. In the Devonian, rivers and coastal deltas were among the most dangerous places on Earth. And sometimes all it took to disappear was swimming into the wrong current, at the wrong time. But in the coldest phases of Earth's history, it wasn't just rivers that posed a threat. It was what hid beneath their frozen surfaces. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,500 to 19,000 years ago, large parts of the northern hemisphere were entombed beneath ice sheets up to 3 kilometers thick. But not all water froze. Beneath the glaciers, meltwater carved deep, unpredictable rivers through rock and sediment. These channels fed floodplains, estuaries, and inland wetlands, perfect environments for ambush predators. Among the creatures navigating this Ice Age world were early crocodilians, semi-aquatic mammals, and massive predatory fish adapted to low-light, low-temperature ecosystems. One of the most striking examples was the saber-toothed salmon, Oncorhynchus rostrosus. Living along the Pacific Northwest during the late Miocene and Pliocene, this species grew to over 2.7 meters long, dwarfing any modern salmon. Fossil skulls from Oregon and California reveal a pair of blade-like canines protruding from the upper jaw, possibly used for dominance displays or combat in shallow, crowded spawning grounds. Though it disappeared before the Ice Age peaked, it reflects a broader pattern seen in glacial environments. Rivers and melt-fed basins became population bottlenecks, places where herds and predators alike were forced into narrow corridors, regardless of risk. In Europe and Siberia, massive Ice Age mammals, such as woolly mammoths, steppe bison, and woolly rhinoceroses, gathered at river crossings during seasonal migrations. And waiting nearby were the Pleistocene's most opportunistic hunters, scimitar-toothed cats, Homotherium serum, with slicing teeth and long limbs ideal for covering ground along open riverbanks, and early Homo sapiens, whose hunting strategies often revolved around predictable choke points like thawing river valleys. Sediment layers and mammoth kill sites, such as those in La Côte de Saint-Prelade, Jersey, and Yana RHS in Siberia, show evidence of mass bone beds near ancient watercourses, many interpreted as ambush zones. In these frozen landscapes, the land offered little margin for error, and the rivers, even when partially iced over, were just as likely to take life as sustain it. And few predators exploited exposed prey like Australia's most infamous reptile, Megalania. Formerly named Varanus priscus, Megalania was the largest terrestrial lizard known to have existed. It lived during the late Pleistocene, coexisting with Homo sapiens and Australia's megafauna roughly 50,000 to 40,000 years ago. Estimates based on vertebral and skull remains suggest it reached lengths of 5 to possibly over 7 meters, and may have weighed more than 500 kilograms, placing it squarely among the top predators of its ecosystem. Megalania was a giant monitor lizard, closely related to modern Komodo dragons. But while Komodos today are restricted to islands and scavenging behavior, Megalania likely had a broader range and far more aggressive habits. Its fossil remains, found in locations like Cuddy Springs and Lake Calabana, are often discovered near waterholes and ancient drainage systems, suggesting a preference for riparian zones where herbivores gathered to drink. This pattern mirrors that of modern large monitors, which are ambush hunters, relying on camouflage, explosive acceleration, and lethal bites. And that bite may have been more than just traumatic. Studies on Komodo saliva have revealed venom glands capable of delivering anticoagulants and toxins that induce shock, blood loss, and systemic failure. If Megalania possessed similar glands, as many researchers now suspect, its bite would not only incapacitate but effectively guarantee death, even after escape. Large prey like Diprotodon, giant wombats, or macropods would have been especially vulnerable during dry periods, when water access narrowed and movement slowed. Early human populations, newly arrived on the continent, would have encountered this threat frequently while following rivers and hunting across arid plains. Rock shelters and charcoal layers at sites like Nawalabila and Malakunanja II show that humans were present in Australia as early as 65,000 years ago. But Megalania disappears from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago. No direct kill sites have been found, but its extinction closely parallels the arrival of firestick farming and intensified human landscape use. Whether through climate stress, habitat fragmentation, or direct competition, Megalania eventually vanished. But during its reign, it was not a scavenger. It was a hunter, one that turned Australia's riversides and wetlands into stalking grounds. And for anything that moved too slowly, a shadow in the reeds could have been the last thing they saw. But not every predator in prehistoric river systems looked like a killer. Some of them didn't even move, until it was too late. During the late Permian and early Triassic periods, over 250 million years ago, Earth's river valleys and swamp basins were ruled by some of the strangest ambush predators to ever evolve. Chief among them were the labyrinthodonts, a now extinct group of primitive amphibians, named for the maze-like enfolding of their tooth enamel. One of the most formidable was Proterogyrinus, a crocodile-like tetrapod that lived in coal swamp environments throughout what is now Europe and North America. Growing over 2 meters in length, with elongated jaws and sharp labyrinthine teeth, it likely fed on fish, invertebrates, and anything small or slow enough to be dragged under. But Proterogyrinus was just one member of a broader ecological guild. Across the Permian supercontinent of Pangaea, slow-moving rivers and oxygen-poor wetlands created conditions ideal for ambush predators. Many of these species had flat, wide skulls with upward-facing eyes, anatomical traits adapted specifically for lurking just below the water's surface. Fossil sites such as the Mason Creek Lagerstätte in Illinois and the Karoo Basin in South Africa preserve a diverse cast of semi-aquatic vertebrates with similar adaptations. Flattened tails for propulsion, sensory pits for detecting vibrations, and massive bite radii relative to body size. But the real danger of these swamps wasn't speed, it was patience. These predators didn't chase, they waited, hidden in aquatic vegetation, under floating debris, or buried in silty riverbeds, until prey came close enough to strike. And when it did, the kill was instantaneous. Powerful jaw closure, backward curved teeth, and constricting limbs ensured the victim never made it back to dry land. For smaller reptiles, early synapsids, or juvenile herbivores moving along the water's edge, these environments were effectively rigged. Even larger species, like Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized herbivore that dominated post-extinction landscapes, frequently show bite marks or scavenging traces on fossil remains found near water sources. What made these systems so lethal wasn't just the predators themselves, but the evolutionary trap they created. Low visibility, soft ground, dense cover, and one narrow path to hydration. In the swamps of pre-dinosaur Earth, survival meant spotting the predator before you touched the water. And many didn't. As river systems spread through prehistoric rainforests, marshes, and deltas, they became home to predators that were neither fish nor fully reptile, but something in between. One of the most striking examples is Prehistoric plumeri, a massive temnospondyl amphibian that lived during the Middle Permian, roughly 270 million years ago, in what is now northeastern Brazil. Based on fossil material from the Parnaíba Basin, estimates place Prehistoric at up to 9 meters in length, making it the largest amphibian ever discovered. Its skull, over 1.5 meters long, was elongated and narrow, resembling that of a modern gharial, well suited for catching fish in slow-moving rivers and swampy floodplains. Like other temnospondyls, it likely used lateral-line sensory organs to detect vibrations in murky water, striking with little or no warning. Prehistoric wasn't alone. Across the Triassic and early Jurassic, a range of amphibians and semi-aquatic reptiles evolved to dominate marsh ecosystems. Some, like Garothorax pulcharimus, had armored skulls and could flatten their bodies against the riverbed, breathing through upward-facing nostrils while completely submerged. Others, like Metaposaurus, gathered in dense numbers during dry seasons, as evaporating water forced prey and predator into ever-tightening margins. These creatures thrived in environments where seasonal flooding and stagnation were common, where oxygen was scarce, vegetation dense, and escape routes few. And alongside them emerged another class of predator, the snake. While modern constrictors didn't appear until the Cenozoic, their ancient relatives, like Madtsoiidae, were already establishing themselves in Gondwanan river systems. Some members of this extinct snake family grew over 6 meters long, and unlike modern aquatic snakes, they may have ambushed prey from underneath, waiting motionless in submerged vegetation until the opportunity to strike arrived. In swamps where footing was unstable, visibility low, and water channels choked with decay, large predators had every advantage. A branch brushing your leg might not be a branch. A log beside the trail might blink. For any species, including early mammals or reptiles, entering the marsh meant entering a zone of sensory failure, where you heard the splash only after the strike. Across deep time, rivers shaped the rise of species and orchestrated their fall. From the armored jaws of Dunkleosteus to the crushing bite of Deinosuchus, from ambush lizards in Pleistocene floodplains to the still waters of the Permian swamp, rivers were never neutral ground. They were the perfect trap, predictable, necessary, and full of teeth. Even in the Ice Age, megafauna like mammoths, bison, and giant sloths died not in open plains, but at crossings, where the mud slowed them and predators waited. And when Homo sapiens stepped into that world, they too learned to respect the edge. Because in every era, water gave life, but took it just as easily. In the history of survival, few places have been more reliable at killing than rivers, and prehistory was written in the bones they left behind.